Welcome back to another peaceful journey through time. Tonight we won't be wandering through dusty libraries or grand palaces. Tonight we're going somewhere much more confined, a place where air was more precious than gold, and silence was the most terrifying sound of all. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your breathing slow down. We're about to slip beneath the waves into a world where survival meant learning to live in a space smaller than your bedroom for months at a time. Picture this. You're not a brave warrior, not a hero from the movies. You're just a young man, perhaps fresh from a farm in Bavaria or a factory in Hamburg. You have healthy lungs and a steady heartbeat, that's all. And for the German Navy during wartime, that was more than enough. No one asked if you were afraid of tight spaces. No one cared if you got seasick. They just needed warm bodies to fill this metal tube of death. Let yourself sink deeper into your warm blanket. Right now, feel the softness of your pillow. Because where we're going, a pillow is nothing more than a luxury concept, a distant memory of comfort that feels as foreign as a hot bath or fresh bread. You're 19, maybe 20. Your mother packed your bag with careful hands, folding each shirt as if it were a prayer. Your father shook your hand with eyes that said everything words couldn't. And now you're standing on a dock in occupied France, staring at what looks like a giant steel cigar floating in dark water. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, gray and cold and indifferent. The wind carries salt and diesel fumes, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the rhythmic clang of metal against metal as the crew prepares for another patrol. This is your new home. This narrow, cramped, suffocating home that will either bring you back as a hero or carry you to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Together we'll explore life, no, let's call it existence, aboard a U-boat during World War II. Not the heroic battles you see on screen, but the very ordinary, very human details. The small things that turned each day into a test of survival and sanity. You'll soon discover that the most dangerous enemy wasn't always the Allied destroyers hunting you above, but sometimes the moldy bread growing beside your bunk, or your bunkmate who grinds his teeth like a broken coffee grinder every single night. Well, breathe the recycled air that tasted of diesel and desperate men. Well, feel the constant dampness that seeped into everything, your clothes, your skin, your dreams. Well, listen to the symphony of a submarine, the steady throb of engines, the mysterious pings echoing through the hull, the whispered prayers during depth charge attacks. But don't worry, this isn't a story of terror or politics. This is a story about adaptation, about how human beings can find normalcy in the most abnormal circumstances, how they learned to sleep in shifts on the same warm mattress, how they rationed not just food and water, but hope itself. You'll learn about the strange intimacy of 50 men living closer together than most families ever do, about the unspoken rules that kept everyone sane, about the small rituals that made each day bearable, the careful sharing of a single cigarette, the silent appreciation of a slightly less terrible meal, the way grown men would huddle around a crackling radio to hear a song from home. These weren't monsters, despite what the movies might suggest. They were just people, tired, homesick, frightened people, trying to survive in conditions that would challenge anyone's humanity. Sons and brothers and fathers caught in circumstances beyond their control, making the best of an impossible situation. Tonight, Well slip into their world as quietly as a submarine slips beneath the waves. Well discover what it really meant to live in a space where privacy was a forgotten concept, where fresh air was a luxury, and where the difference between life and death often came down to nothing more than luck. Before we dive deep into the darkness, leave me a comment, letting me know where in the world you're listening tonight. I love imagining these stories drifting into dreams all around the globe, carrying you gently into peaceful sleep. Take a slow, deep breath now. Feel your body sinking into your comfortable bed, so different from the narrow bunks we're about to explore. Let my voice be your guide as we slip away from the safety of the surface world. We're about to cast off from the dock. The diesel engines are rumbling to life, sending vibrations through the metal deck beneath your feet. The last ropes are being untied, the last letters from home tucked safely into pockets. Don't worry, this journey is far safer than the original. No depth charges will find us here. No enemy ships hunt us in these peaceful waters of memory and imagination. So close your eyes now. Let the gentle rocking motion of your imagination carry you forward. We're submerging. Down, down, into the quiet depths where history sleeps and dreams are born. The hatch is closing above us. The adventure begins. Chapter 1. The Unwanted Warmth. Sleep sanitation and the evaporation of privacy. It's a shared asset, a hot bunk. When you finish your exhausting watch, stumbling with fatigue, a crewmate will crawl out of that narrow space, leaving behind the warm imprint of his body on the thin, worn mattress. You'll slide in feeling that strange, intimate warmth and try very hard not to think about where it came from. The mattress itself tells a story in textures and scents. Your fingers sink into fabric that feels perpetually damp, as if the very molecules of the ocean have seeped through the steel hull and settled into every fiber. There's the smell of mustiness, that deep, earthy odor of things that haven't seen sunlight in months. Layered beneath that is the faint but persistent aroma of old sweat, not unpleasant exactly, but unmistakably human. It's the scent of fear and exhaustion and determination, all pressed into cotton and wool and time. You might be listening to this right now from your own comfortable bed, perhaps shifting position easily, stretching your legs without a second thought. Here, turning over becomes a luxury requiring careful calculation, a slow, deliberate movement designed to avoid jabbing your elbow into the face of the man sleeping just inches away. Every motion must be considered planned, executed with the precision of a chess move. The pillow, if you can call it that, is a lumpy gathering of whatever soft material could be found. Sometimes it's a rolled-up shirt. Sometimes it's a canvas bag stuffed with rope ends. Sometimes there's no pillow at all, just the curve of your arm cradling your head against the metal frame that's been worn smooth by countless other heads in countless other nights. Above you, below you, beside you, the boat breathes with the presence of 50 other souls. It's a symphony of sleep that you learn to read like music. There's the steady, deep breathing of Hans from Hamburg, a sound so regular you could set your watch by it. The occasional snort and shuffle from Muller, who always seems to be wrestling with invisible demons in his dreams. The soft whisper of someone talking to himself in sleep, words too quiet to understand, but somehow comforting in their humanity. And then there are the blankets if that's what you want to call them. Rough wool that scratches against skin, grown sensitive from salt air and confinement. They're always slightly damp, carrying that particular chill that seeps into your bones and settles there. You pull them close anyway, because warmth, any warmth, is precious here. Even second-hand warmth. Even borrowed warmth from the body of a stranger who's become closer to you than your own brother. Simply by virtue of sharing this impossible space. The darkness is never complete. There is always the red glow of an instrument panel somewhere, the thin line of light seeping under a hatch, the phosphorescent hands of someone's watch marking time in the eternal twilight of submarine life. Your eyes adjust until you can make out the shadowy forms of sleeping men arranged like cargo in every available space. Some have hammocks strung between pipes. Others curl up on the deck beside machinery, using their life jackets as pillows. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about sleep here is how the boat itself becomes your cradle. The submarine rocks, gently, back and forth, like a massive steel cradle singing a lullaby made of metal groans and water whispers. When you're on the surface, there's the steady throb of diesel engines, a heartbeat that vibrates through the hull and into your chest, synchronizing with your own pulse until you can't tell where the boat ends and you begin. When submerged, the motion changes. It becomes more subtle, more mysterious. The boat glides through underwater currents you can't see, responding to temperatures and pressures and the secret geography of the ocean floor. Sometimes you feel like you're flying through liquid space, weightless and suspended between sea and sky. The sounds of sleep here are different too. Not just the breathing and snoring, but the boat's own restless movements. The gentle creak of metal expanding and contracting. The distant whisper of water flowing through ballast tanks. The soft tick-tick-tick of cooling engines. The occasional groan of the hull as it adjusts to pressure changes like the boat itself is dreaming. And in the midst of all this, the shared warmth, the shared air, the shared hopes and fears, something unexpected happens. You begin to sleep better than you ever have in your life. Not because it's comfortable, nothing about it is comfortable, but because the constant presence of your crewmates, the steady rhythm of the boat, the knowledge that 50 other souls are trusting their lives to the same steel walls that protect you. It creates a kind of peace. Your breathing slows to match the boat's rhythm. Your heartbeat finds harmony with the engines. Your dreams begin to taste of salt water and possibility. When you wake, there's always a moment of confusion. Where am I? Then the familiar sounds and smells orient you, and you remember your home. This impossible, uncomfortable, miraculous floating home that carries you safely through the hostile depths. And when your watch comes, you'll slide out of that warm space, leaving your own body's heat for the next man, continuing the endless cycle of shared comfort in this most uncomfortable of worlds. There is exactly one toilet for 50 men. And it's not simply a toilet. Oh no, that would be far too simple for submarine life. It's a mechanical beast, a complex contraption bristling with valves and levers and gauges that would make a steam locomotive engineer nervous. Use the wrong sequence and you won't just make a mess on the floor. You'll create a pressure event that could turn the entire compartment into a fountain. A decidedly unsanitary fountain. Picture this marvel of German engineering a toilet that requires an instruction manual, a toilet that demands respect, patience, and a certain amount of courage every single time you approach it. It sits there in its tiny closet of a room surrounded by pipes and valves, like some sort of porcelain altar to the gods of pressure and plumbing. Every trip to relieve yourself becomes a test of skill and nerve. You step into that cramped space, barely larger than a phone booth, and survey the array of controls like a pilot preparing for takeoff. First, you must calculate the outside water pressure. Too deep. And the ocean will win this particular battle of wills. You turn valve A slowly, listening for the telltale hiss that means the system is responding correctly. Then you pull lever B, feeling the mechanical resistance as pressures equalize somewhere deep in the boat's metal belly. You pause here. This is the moment for a small prayer to whatever deity watches over submarine plumbing. The Catholics cross themselves. The Protestants mutter quiet appeals. The practical atheists simply hold their breath and hope for the best. Finally, you press handle C, and if you've done everything correctly, the system responds with a satisfying whoosh that carries your business away into the cold Atlantic depths. If you've made an error, well, let's just say that becoming famous throughout the boat for the wrong reasons is remarkably easy when you're dealing with pressurized waste systems. The instruction sheet. Yes, there's actually a laminated instruction sheet, reads like a military manual crossed with a plumbing textbook. Step 1. Check depth gauge. Step 2. Verify pressure differential. Step 3. Pray to your preferred deity. Step 4. Proceed with caution. But here's where things get truly interesting in that peculiar way that submarine life specializes in. At certain depths, usually when you're running silent and deep trying to avoid those destroyers hunting overhead, the toilet simply doesn't work. The pressure of all that water pressing down on the hull means that no amount of lever pulling and valve turning will overcome the basic laws of physics. Imagine the scenario nature calls with increasing urgency, but the captain announces over the intercom, "Sorry, gentlemen, we're too deep. The pressure will win. Please be patient." Your bladder and your patience enter into a tense negotiation with the Atlantic Ocean, serving as an unforgiving mediator. These moments test more than just physical endurance. They test the bonds between men who are living closer together than most married couples ever do. There's a particular kind of misery that comes from sharing discomfort, so intimate, so basic, so fundamentally human. Everyone understands. Everyone has been there. Everyone will be there again. The waiting becomes a shared experience. Men shift uncomfortably at their posts, trying to focus on their instruments while dealing with increasingly urgent biological demands. Someone might make a quiet joke to break the tension. Someone else might offer a philosophical observation about the absurdity of their situation. But mostly, they wait in the kind of patient solidarity that only comes from having no other choice. And when the captain finally gives the all clear when the depth decreases enough for basic plumbing to function again, there's often a quiet rush that has nothing to do with enemy contact and everything to do with the most basic human needs finally being met. The relief, in every sense of the word, is palpable throughout the boat. Men return to their duties with a kind of grateful satisfaction that people on the surface take completely for granted. There's no embarrassment in this relief, no shame in having basic biological needs. Down here, such things are simply part of the rhythm of survival. Gradually, you get used to it all. The mechanical complexity, the pressure calculations, the waiting, the occasional failures that result in cleanup duties for everyone involved. The embarrassment fades, replaced by a shared understanding that transcends normal social boundaries. Everyone is in the same boat, quite literally. Everyone faces the same indignities, the same challenges, the same basic human needs that don't pause for war or danger or the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. There's a democracy in discomfort that breaks down barriers faster than any political philosophy ever could. The man who was a banker in civilian life now shares bathroom humor with the farmer from the countryside. The university graduate and the factory worker find common ground in their shared mastery of submarine plumbing protocols. Social distinctions matter less when everyone has experienced the particular humility of mechanical toilet failure. In this small space, with its complex machinery and simple human needs, 50 strangers learn to become something more than a crew. They become a family bound together by the most basic, most human experiences imaginable. And perhaps that's the most remarkable thing about life in this steel tube beneath the waves, how the most uncomfortable, embarrassing, difficult aspects of daily life somehow become the foundation for the deepest kind of human understanding. You eat, sleep, work, and exist just centimeters away from other human beings. You can hear the sound of their chewing the soft crunch of stale bread between teeth, the careful slurping of thin soup. You smell their coffee, or what passes for coffee down here. That bitter ersatz brew, that's more memory than flavor. You feel their breath when they speak warm and humid in the recycled air that everyone has been breathing and rebreathing for weeks. Imagine trying to read a letter from home while someone's elbow rests against your shoulder. Not by choice, but because there's simply nowhere else for it to go. Picture trying to write in a diary while another man's knee presses against your back, and a third person's foot dangles just inches from your head as he tries to sleep in the bunk above you. Your possessions. Well, calling them possessions seems almost generous. You own perhaps 3 or 4 letters from home, their edges soft from countless readings. Maybe a photograph carefully wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from the ever-present dampness. Perhaps a small knife or a deck of cards worn smooth from endless games, played in the dim red light of night watches. These treasures, for that's what they become down here, must be tucked into whatever crevices you can find. Behind a pipe that runs along the ceiling, under your mattress, competing for space with the mattress of the man below, wedged between electrical conduits where no one else can accidentally disturb them. Every square inch of the submarine serves multiple purposes, and storage is a constant puzzle that requires creativity and careful negotiation. Think about your room right now, wherever you might be listening to this. You probably have a desk, maybe a dresser, perhaps a closet where your clothes hang in orderly rows. Here, your wardrobe is a canvas bag that lives under someone else's feet. Your desk is whatever flat surface you can claim for 10 minutes while writing a letter. Your privacy is the ability to turn your face toward the metal wall and pretend that 49 other people aren't watching your every move. But somehow, and this is the remarkable thing men adapt to this impossible intimacy, they develop an etiquette of ignorance, a polite blindness that allows everyone to maintain some semblance of dignity. When someone receives bad news from home, the others around him suddenly become very interested in their own tasks, their own thoughts, their own small concerns. When someone needs a moment to compose himself, space magically appears, not physical space, because that's impossible, but emotional space. Psychological breathing room. You learn to sleep while someone reads aloud just feet away. You learn to eat while conversations flow around you in half a dozen regional dialects. You learn to think your own thoughts while surrounded by the thoughts and dreams and fears of 49 other souls, all pressed together in this steel capsule beneath the waves. The sounds become a kind of symphony that you learn to interpret and ignore simultaneously. The scratch of pencil on paper as someone writes home. The soft whisper of pages turning in a well-worn book. The gentle click of knitting needles. Yes, some of the men knit repairing socks and sweaters with the same careful attention they give to maintaining torpedo tubes. And then, the alarm sounds. Suddenly, space that was already impossibly tight becomes something else entirely. Bodies that had found a careful equilibrium now move with urgent purpose. Elbows and knees and shoulders collide in the dim red light as men rush to their emergency stations. The air fills with whispered curses and muttered apologies as everyone tries to move through spaces designed for stationary equipment, not urgent human movement. Entschuldigung. Sorry. Excuse me. The words overlap and blend as 50 men try to occupy spaces meant for 30, moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos. Someone's kit bag swings into someone else's face. A man trying to climb to an upper station accidentally steps on the hand of someone below. Emergency lighting casts wild shadows that make the already cramped spaces seem to contract even further. For a few moments, the submarine feels like it might burst from the sheer pressure of human activity compressed into such a small space. The air becomes thick, not just with recycled oxygen, but with the collective breath of men moving fast hearts, pumping adrenaline flowing through their systems like electricity through the boat's circuits. Everything becomes urgent, compressed, intense. The normal, careful choreography of submarine life collapses into controlled chaos as training takes over and every man moves toward his designated purpose. And then, gradually, the immediate emergency passes. The relative silence returns, settling over the boat like a familiar blanket. One by one, men return to their stations, their bunks, their small claimed territories. Heart rate slow. Breathing becomes steady again. The careful dance of shared space resumes as if it had never been interrupted. The boat's breathing becomes regular. Once more the steady whisper of air circulation, the distant hum of electrical systems, the soft creaks and groans of metal adjusting to pressure and temperature changes. And you settle back into your tiny corner of this shared world, finding somehow that the brief chaos has made the normal intimacy feel almost spacious by comparison. In this place where privacy is impossible and personal space is a luxury that simply doesn't exist, 50 strangers have learned to live as something closer than family sharing. Not just air and food and danger, but the most fundamental human experience of all, the simple, complex act of existing together in a space too small for anything except understanding. The air on a U-boat is like a thick soup that you don't sip, but rather inhale with every breath. It's a complex mixture of scents that layer upon each other, like the movements of a symphony, some dominant, some subtle, all combining to create something entirely unique to this underwater world. The base note, the foundation that everything else builds upon, is diesel oil. Heavy, pungent, inescapable. It permeates everything. The metal walls, the fabric of hammocks, the wooden surfaces worn smooth by countless hands. This is the clean, refined petroleum smell you might encounter at a modern gas station. This is thick industrial diesel, slightly burnt from engines that run hot and hard, mixed with the metallic tang of machinery that's been soaked in oil for months, maybe years. That diesel scent never fades. Never. It becomes the olfactory heartbeat of the submarine, as constant and reliable as the engines themselves. You can smell it even when the engines are quiet, seeping from every surface, like the boat's own particular perfume. Layered over this foundation is the scent of damp metal iron and steel that have been breathing salt air and condensation until every surface carries that particular smell of wet iron, like old keys left in the rain. It's not quite rust, not yet, but it's the promise of rust, the beginnings of oxidation that the crew fights constantly with oil and paint and careful maintenance. And then there's the unmistakable aroma of 50 men who haven't had a proper bath in weeks. It's not as unpleasant as you might imagine. Human sweat, when shared by so many for so long, becomes something almost familiar, comforting even. It's the smell of hard work, of shared effort, of men who sleep close together and work side by side and breathe the same recycled air until their individual scents blend into something collective, something that speaks of community rather than neglect. Mixed into this human bass note are the smaller, more specific scents that tell the story of daily life. There's the musty, earthy smell of mold growing on bread stored in the perpetual dampness. Not just any mold. Submarine mold has its own character, fed by salt air and humidity, and the particular dampness that comes from being surrounded by miles of ocean. From the tiny galley comes the aroma of boiled cabbage, that slightly sulfurous vegetable smell that somehow becomes appetizing when it's one of the few fresh scents available. Sometimes there's the smell of whatever soup the cook has managed to create from their dwindling supplies, usually featuring potatoes and whatever protein can be coaxed from tins and preserved meats. And threading through all of this is the sharp chemical scent of the air filtration system, a clean, almost medicinal smell that reminds everyone that the air they're breathing has been processed, recycled, cleaned by machines and filters. It's the smell of artificial life support, of human ingenuity, keeping human life possible in an environment that wasn't meant for human habitation. But there's one scent that's particularly unique to submarine life, something you'd never encounter on land, the smell of batteries charging. When the electric motors are running and the massive battery banks below decks are being recharged, they emit a sharp, acidic aroma that cuts through all the other scents like a knife. It's acrid, almost burning, with an electrical quality that seems to make the air itself tingle. This isn't just a smell, it's almost a taste, something that coats the back of your throat and reminds you that you're living inside a machine, dependent on electrical systems and chemical reactions for your very life. The strange thing is, after about a week, you stop noticing most of it. Not because the smells disappear. Oh no, they're stronger than ever. but because they've become part of you. The diesel oil seeps into your clothes, into your skin, into your hair, until you can't tell where the submarine ends and you begin. The collective human scent becomes as natural as your own breath. The metallic dampness becomes the scent of home, your uniform. When you finally get a chance to change it, smells like the boat even after it's been washed in seawater and harsh soap. Your hair carries traces of diesel and metal, even when you try to clean it with precious fresh water. Your skin absorbs these scents until they're part of your chemical signature, your personal atmosphere. And when you finally return to land, when you step off the submarine and onto solid ground for the first time in months, it's the fresh air that smells strange. Clean air feels thin, almost empty. The scent of trees and earth and normal human civilization seems artificial after months of the submarine's concentrated essence of life. People on shore might wrinkle their noses when you pass, catching that distinctive submarine smell that clings to returnees like a badge of honor. But to you, their clean, normal scents seem somehow incomplete, lacking the complexity and depth of air that's been shared and recycled and lived in by 50 souls working together for survival. That scent, that complex, layered, sometimes overwhelming symphony of smells, is the aroma of survival. It's not pleasant, not by normal standards, but it means the boat is still running. The engines are still turning, the air is still flowing, and life continues in this impossible place. And it means that you're still alive, still breathing, still part of this extraordinary community of men who've learned to call a steel tube home. Breathe it in. And somehow, against all logic, it begins to smell like safety. Chapter 2. The Menu of Desperation. Food, drink, and rare pleasures. It's not a social event, not a gathering around a family table with conversation and laughter. It's a refueling operation as mechanical and necessary as adding oil to the engines or charging the batteries. Food is fuel, nothing more, nothing less. And like everything else in this underwater world, it comes with its own particular challenges and compromises. The first week's menu seems manageable. Dark rye bread, dense and hearty. A small portion of butter, carefully rationed. Sausages hanging from the ceiling like strange meat-filled ornaments. Tins of this, jars of that, crates of potatoes that still carry the honest smell of earth from some German farm that feels a world away from this steel capsule beneath the waves. But the ocean has its own opinions about food storage. The humidity down here doesn't just dampen spirits, it dampens everything. The constant moisture in the air, the condensation that forms on every cold surface, the way wetness seems to seep through metal and into spaces where it shouldn't belong. It all conspires against the simple act of keeping food edible. The bread is the first to surrender. Those sturdy loaves that looked so robust at the beginning of the patrol begin to show their weakness within days. First, tiny green dots appear along the crusts, like miniature forests taking root in the rye. Then the dots spread, connecting, growing into a fine fuzzy coating that transforms the bread into something that looks more like a botanical experiment than a meal. You learn to cut away the worst parts. The knife becomes your surgeon's scalpel, carefully excising the most aggressive colonies of mold, salvaging what you can from what remains. Waste is not an option. Not here. Not when the nearest grocery store is several thousand feet straight up and guarded by enemy destroyers. The sausages. Ah, the sausages tell their own story of gradual defeat. They hang from the ceiling, like a peculiar chandelier swaying gently with the boat's motion. At first, they're firm and proud, their casings taut with promise. But as days turn to weeks, they begin to weep. Drops of rendered fat fall slowly, steadily creating small puddles on the deck below that someone must constantly mop up. The smell changes too, from the hearty aroma of smoked meat to something more complex, more questionable. And then there are the sausages they called Dauerwurst, eternal sausage. These were supposed to be the miracle of German food engineering, specially designed and processed to resist spoilage, to last indefinitely in any conditions. Eternal, they called them, as if they had discovered the secret to immortal meat. But apparently, the mold never received that particular memo. Even the eternal sausages, for all their scientific preparation and chemical preservation, eventually surrender to the patient persistence of submarine fungi. The mold doesn't care about German engineering or military specifications. It simply does. What mold does, it grows, slowly and steadily, turning even the most processed, most preserved foods into something that belongs in a biology textbook rather than on a dinner plate. You develop new skills down here, skills they don't teach in any cooking school. How to identify which spots of mold can be safely cut away, and which indicate that the entire piece of food has been compromised. How to tell the difference between natural meat aging and actual spoilage. How to make peace with eating things that would have horrified your mother, your girlfriend, your former civilian self. The process becomes almost meditative. You examine each piece of bread, each slice of sausage, with the careful attention of a jeweler examining precious stones. Is this green patch small enough to remove? Is this soft spot just the natural texture of aged meat or something more concerning? Can this be saved, or should it join the growing pile of casualties in the waste bucket? And then you eat, you chew, methodically, purposefully. Your jaw works up and down in steady rhythm, breaking down whatever nutrition can be extracted from these compromised ingredients. You swallow, feeling the food make its way down your throat, carrying whatever vitamins and calories and life-sustaining properties it still possesses to your body, which needs fuel regardless of flavor or freshness. You continue. Because continuing is what you do down here. Because your body needs energy to stand watch, to maintain equipment, to think clearly during the long hours when clear thinking might mean the difference between life and death. Because appetite is a luxury, but nutrition is a necessity. Taste becomes abstract. Your tongue learns to ignore the subtle off flavors, the slightly sour notes, the textures that aren't quite what they should be. Your mind learns to focus on the simple fact that you're eating, that you're taking in the protein and carbohydrates and fats that will keep your body functioning for another day, another watch, another dive into the hostile depths. The bread might be spotted with mold, but it still contains flour and grain. The sausage might be starting its own small ecosystem, but it still carries the protein your muscles need. The butter might taste slightly rancid, but it still provides the fats that keep your body warm in the eternal chill of the deep ocean. You chew, you swallow, you continue. Because down here, continuation is everything. And sometimes Continuation tastes like moldy bread and questionable sausage eaten in the dim red light while the ocean presses against the hull and carries you toward whatever tomorrow might bring. Not the captain, not the torpedo officer, not the chief engineer, though they all have their crucial roles. But when you're talking about morale, about the difference between merely surviving and actually living through another day in this steel tomb, the cook holds more power than anyone else aboard. He's not a trained chef, mind you. He's usually just a sailor who wasn't particularly good at anything else, too clumsy for the torpedo room, too nervous for the periscope, too slow for the engine room. So they gave him the galley, that impossibly small space, barely larger than a closet, and told him to work miracles. And somehow he does. The galley itself defies logic. Imagine trying to cook for 50 hungry men in a space no bigger than the closet where you might keep your winter coats. Every surface serves multiple purposes. The tiny stove, no larger than what you might find in a camping trailer, must produce enough food to keep an entire crew functioning. The prep area consists of whatever flat surface isn't currently occupied by something else. Sometimes the lid of a storage box, sometimes a board balanced across two containers. There's barely room for one person to stand and work. Yet somehow this space must produce breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 50 men day after day, week after week. The cook moves through this confined area like a dancer in a phone booth, every motion economical, every gesture precise. Turn left to check the pot, reach right for the knife pivot to access the storage bin, down to retrieve ingredients from boxes wedged under every possible surface. The heat in here is almost unbearable. The stove adds its warmth to air that's already thick and humid from the boat's life support systems. Steam from boiling water mingles with the general moisture that permeates everything submarine life touches. The cook works in a perpetual state of perspiration, wiping his brow with a towel that's never quite dry-breathing air that feels more like soup than atmosphere. But his real magic isn't in the space he works in, it's in what he works with. Picture unlabeled tins that could contain anything from meat to vegetables to something that might once have been fruit. Imagine sacks of potatoes that have been stored so long they've begun to develop personalities of their own. Consider containers of fat that serve as both cooking oil and flavor enhancer, depending on creativity and desperation. From these unpromising ingredients, he creates meals, not good meals, not memorable meals, but meals that fill stomachs and provide nutrition. And sometimes, just sometimes, remind the crew that they're still human beings capable of taking pleasure in simple things. And then there are the potatoes. Ah, the potatoes. If diesel oil is the lifeblood of the submarine, then potatoes are its soul. They're stored everywhere in nets hanging from the ceiling, in sacks wedged between machinery, in boxes that get smaller and smaller as the patrol continues. They're the foundation of every meal, the reliable constant in a world where nothing else can be counted on. But submarine storage takes its toll on potatoes just like everything else. After weeks in the damp, confined atmosphere of the boat, they begin to evolve. Pale green shoots emerge from their surfaces, reaching toward lights that aren't quite bright enough, searching for soil that doesn't exist. The potatoes begin to look like alien life forms, attempting escape, bristling with pale tendrils that grow longer each day. The crew becomes obsessed with these sprouting potatoes in the way that people become obsessed with anything when they have limited options. They watch the growth of the sprouts with fascination, measuring their progress, placing quiet bets on which potato will produce the longest shoot. Some of the men name individual potatoes, tracking their development, like gardeners tending prize specimens. But eventually, of course, the potatoes must fulfill their destiny. The cook peels away the sprouts, those pale alien tendrils that represented the potato's last grasp at a different kind of life. What remains gets chopped, boiled, mashed, fried, or incorporated into soup. Boiled potato sprouts become an unexpected delicacy, a strange submarine vegetable that tastes like nothing anyone has ever eaten on land, but somehow works in this context where everything is slightly wrong and completely necessary. The men eat these transformed potatoes without complaint, even with something approaching appreciation. In a world where fresh vegetables are a memory and variety is a luxury, even sprouted potatoes taste like abundance. They provide substance, warmth, and the psychological comfort of eating something that once grew in actual soil, under actual sunlight. But sometimes, just sometimes, magic happens in that tiny overheated galley. On a lucky day, when the ingredients align just right, and the cook's creativity peaks, and the sea gods smile down on this little community of displaced souls, he manages to create something special. A soup that's actually hot steaming aromatic. A stew that combines the available ingredients into something that tastes almost like the meals the men remember from home. When that happens, when a bowl of genuinely hot soup appears in front of you, the steam rising to warm your face, carrying actual flavor and the promise of warmth spreading through your body. In that moment, you feel something you haven't felt in weeks. Not just fed, not just refueled, but actually cared for by another human being who took the time and effort to create something nourishing from whatever meager resources were available. In that moment, the cook transforms from fellow sufferer to something approaching a mother, a provider, someone whose very existence makes life not just bearable, but briefly beautiful. And you sit there cradling that warm bowl in cold hands, letting the steam bathe your face and remember what it feels like to be human. Fresh water, clean water, drinking water, it's more precious than ammunition, more valuable than fuel, more carefully guarded than the submarine's location coordinates. Every drop is accounted for, rationed, measured, with the precision that other people might reserve for diamonds or rare medicines. You don't drink water because it tastes good. You don't drink it for pleasure or refreshment, or because you're feeling a bit thirsty and thought a nice glass of water might be pleasant. You drink it because your body requires it to continue functioning, and continuing to function is pretty much the only goal that matters when you're sealed inside a steel tube hundreds of feet beneath the hostile surface of the Atlantic Ocean. The water supply lives in tanks built into the submarine's hull, great metal reservoirs that hold what must last for weeks, sometimes months. Every gallon loaded at port is calculated against the duration of the patrol, the number of men aboard the absolute minimum required for drinking and cooking. There's no extra. There's no buffer. There's certainly no allowance for long, hot showers or casual hand washing, or any of the 1,000 small ways that people on land use water without thinking. The water itself, well, calling it water is technically accurate, but somehow insufficient. It has spent weeks, sometimes months, sitting in metal tanks that have never seen sunlight. It has absorbed the flavors of iron and steel, picking up the metallic essence of its containers until it tastes like something that has been filtered through the engine room of an old factory. There's a mineral heaviness to it, a tang that coats your tongue and reminds you with every sip that this liquid has had a very different journey than the water you might remember from mountain streams or kitchen taps. You drink it not because it's refreshing, but because you need it. It tastes like it has been processed through machinery, which, in a sense, it is pumped, filtered, stored, and distributed through a system designed for survival rather than pleasure. Each sip carries the flavor of practicality, of engineering, of human ingenuity, applied to the basic problem of staying alive in an environment that wants very much to kill you. But sometimes there are warm drinks. Coffee becomes a concept rather than a reality. What they serve as coffee is made from roasted chicory root ground and brewed into something that is indeed dark and certainly bitter, but contains about as much actual coffee as it does champagne. They call it Ersatzkaffee, substitute coffee, which is a polite way of saying brown liquid that is hot and vaguely coffee-shaped. It's black, it's bitter, and it contains absolutely no caffeine whatsoever. But it is hot. And in the perpetual chill of submarine life, where everything is slightly damp and the ocean's cold seeps through steel plates into your very bones, hot is worth more than flavor. Hot is worth more than authenticity. Hot is worth more than just about anything except air and the continued structural integrity of the hull. The men gather around these cups of substitute coffee, like worshippers at a shrine wrapping cold fingers around warm metal, letting the steam rise to their faces in the dim red light of the submarine's eternal twilight. They don't discuss the fact that it tastes nothing like the coffee they remember from civilian life. They don't mention that it's basically hot plant water with pretensions. They simply hold their cups and feel grateful for warmth, for the ritual of drinking something together, for the small comfort of a shared experience that connects them to the surface world they've temporarily left behind. Tea, when available, comes from leaves that have been stored so long they've given up any pretense of freshness. But like the ersatz coffee, it serves its purpose, providing warmth, providing ritual, providing a reason for men to sit together for a few minutes and remember what it feels like to pause to sip, to take a moment that isn't entirely devoted to survival. Right now, wherever you are, you could probably walk to your kitchen and pour yourself a glass of cold, clean water from the tap, or open your refrigerator and select from multiple beverage options, or brew actual coffee from beans that were probably roasted sometime in the last month rather than the last year. Think about that for a moment. That simple action, reaching for a glass of water when you feel like it represents a luxury that would seem impossible to these men. The ability to be casually thirsty, to drink for pleasure rather than necessity, to choose what you want to drink based on preference rather than availability. It's a freedom so basic that most people never think about it at all. Down here, hydration is a military operation. Every cup of water, every sip of that terrible ersatz coffee, every drop consumed is part of a carefully calculated system designed to keep 50 men alive and functional for as long as possible on finite resources. There's no waste, no excess, no casual consumption. Water is life measured in ounces and distributed according to need rather than desire. And yet, somehow sharing that metallic tasting water, that bitter chicory coffee, that questionable tea made from ancient leaves, somehow it becomes a communion. The shared experience of making do, of finding satisfaction in the bare minimum of being grateful for warm liquid, in cold circumstances, creates a bond that people who have never experienced real scarcity might find difficult to understand. When you finally do get that sip of warm, bitter, completely unsatisfying substitute coffee, when you wrap your hands around that metal cup and feel the warmth seep into your cold fingers, you discover that satisfaction has nothing to do with quality and everything to do with gratitude. And in that moment, the worst coffee you've ever tasted becomes the best coffee you've ever needed. They happen rarely. These moments when survival becomes something more than just survival. When the grinding routine of submarine life pauses long enough for something that might almost be called joy. When 50 men crammed into a steel tube beneath a hostile ocean. Remember briefly what it feels like to celebrate being alive. After a successful torpedo attack, after the confirmation that an enemy vessel has been sent to the bottom, after the tense hours of silent running, and the gradual realization that they've escaped retaliation. The captain might make an announcement that transforms the entire atmosphere of the boat. Schnapps ration for the crew. It's not much, perhaps a shot glass worth of clear, potent alcohol for each man, small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, precious enough to represent a small fortune in this world, where luxury has been stripped down to its most basic elements. The schnapps burns going down a sharp, clean fire that cuts through the metallic taste that seems to coat everything in submarine life. One small sip, held in the mouth for a moment, to savor the sensation of something that exists purely for pleasure rather than survival. Then the swallow and the immediate warmth that spreads from throat to stomach, a heat that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the rare experience of consuming something because you want to rather than because you need to. It doesn't make anyone drunk. There's far too little alcohol for that. And besides, being drunk on a submarine would be both dangerous and pointless. But it does something more important than intoxication. It burns away fatigue, at least for a moment. It provides a brief respite from the constant low-level stress of living in an environment that requires constant vigilance. It offers a tiny vacation from fear. But perhaps more surprising than the celebratory schnapps is the chocolate. Yes, chocolate. In a world where fresh food is a memory and sugar is rationed like gold chocolate, serves a purpose that has nothing to do with dessert and everything to do with survival. It's distributed not as a treat, but as a tool, a carefully calculated dose of quick energy and mood enhancement for men standing long watches in the perpetual twilight of submarine duty. During the endless night watches, when men must remain alert in the dim red lighting that preserves night vision, when the submarine runs silent and deep through waters that might conceal enemy destroyers, when attention must remain focused on instruments and gauges and the subtle sounds that might mean the difference between life and death. During these watches, chocolate becomes medicine, a small square of dark chocolate, rich and slightly bitter, melting slowly on the tongue. The sugar provides immediate energy to a brain that's been functioning on minimal calories and maximum stress. The trace amounts of caffeine, precious caffeine, almost impossible to find in any other form. Aboard the submarine, help maintain alertness during hours when the body wants nothing more than sleep. But the real magic of these rare moments, the schnapps after a successful attack, the chocolate during a difficult watch, isn't in the alcohol, or the sugar, or the brief reprieve from submarine rations. The real magic is in what these moments do to the men who share them. For just a few minutes, 50 strangers who have been thrown together by war and circumstance stop being a crew and become something more. They become brothers, connected not just by proximity and shared danger, but by shared pleasure, shared relief, shared gratitude for still being alive in a world that seems designed to kill them. In those moments, watching faces relax around the small flame of shared celebration, you can see the men they were before the war. The farmer from Bavaria, the factory worker from Hamburg, the student from Berlin. They emerge briefly from their submarine personas and remember what it feels like to simply enjoy something together. To raise a glass, even a tiny glass, in toast to their continued existence. The barriers that normally separate officer from enlisted man, experienced sailor from nervous recruit, become permeable. Everyone receives the same small portion. Everyone shares the same brief respite. Everyone participates equally in this small democracy of pleasure. For a few moments, rank matters less than the shared recognition that they have survived. Another day, accomplished, another mission, remained alive in circumstances that seem designed to prove the opposite. But like all moments of joy in this underwater world, these celebrations are brief. The schnapps glasses are collected, washed, and stored away. The chocolate wrappers are carefully disposed of. Nothing can be wasted. Nothing can be left to create disorder in a space where everything must have its place. The men return to their stations, their watches, their endless routine of maintenance and vigilance. The boat settles back into its familiar rhythm. The steady throb of engines resumes its hypnotic pattern. The soft whisper of air circulation returns to prominence. The normal sounds of submarine life, the distant clank of machinery, the soft murmur of necessary conversation, the gentle creaks and groans of metal under pressure reassert themselves as the soundtrack of existence. And gradually, as the warmth of the schnapps fades and the energy from the chocolate dissolves into the general fatigue of submarine life, you find yourself settling back into the patient endurance that defines life aboard a U-boat. The celebration becomes a memory, something to be treasured and recalled during the longer, harder hours that inevitably follow. You close your eyes and let the familiar motion of the boat carry you toward whatever rest might be possible, dreaming perhaps of a real meal in a real restaurant on solid ground that doesn't move beneath your feet, but somehow content for now with the taste of rare chocolate still lingering on your tongue. Chapter 4. When minds begin to drift. Boredom, fear, and hope. Nothing at all. No enemy contacts, no emergency dives, no depth charge attacks, no mechanical crises requiring immediate attention. Just the endless blue void outside the hull, and the familiar steel walls inside, both seeming to stretch into infinity with no change, no variation, no break in the monotony that has become the defining characteristic of existence. The ocean above remains empty of targets. The instruments register nothing but water in every direction, water, and more water extending to horizons that you can't see from inside this metal cocoon. Day blends into night, blends into day, again marked only by the arbitrary changes of watch schedules and the gradual dimming and brightening of the submarine's artificial lighting. Boredom becomes a more dangerous enemy than any destroyer. Fear at least keeps you alert. Fear sharpens the mind, focuses attention, makes every moment meaningful, because it might be your last. But boredom eats away at you slowly, relentlessly, like rust consuming metal from the inside out. It dulls. The mind makes time stretch like taffy, transforms minutes into hours, and hours into eternities of unfilled, purposeless existence. You learn to kill time with the dedication that other people reserve for important skills. Card games become elaborate tournaments, stretching across multiple watches, with complex scoring systems and stakes measured in cigarette rations or extra dessert portions. The same deck of cards worn soft from countless shuffles deals the same hands in endless variation, poker scat, patience games played alone while others sleep. Books become precious beyond measure. A single paperback novel read and reread until the pages separate from the binding becomes an entire library. You memorize passages, analyze character motivations with the intensity of a university literature professor, find new meanings in simple sentences just because you've read them for the 50th time, and your mind desperately needs anything to occupy itself with. Someone has brought along a chess set pieces carved from wood and small enough to fit in a pocket. Games stretch across days, moves contemplated for hours, because there's no hurry, no pressing need to finish quickly. Men study the board with the concentration of generals planning military campaigns, because in this environment, where meaningful decisions are rare, even deciding whether to move a pawn or a bishop becomes significant. You find yourself staring at instruments for no reason other than they provide something to look at. The pressure gauges become objects of fascination, not because you need to monitor them constantly, but because their gentle fluctuations represent the only movement, the only change in a world that has become static. You watch the needles move fractionally, marking tiny changes in depth or pressure that mean nothing operationally, but provide visual stimulation for eyes starved of variety. And then, your mind begins to play tricks. At first, it's just small things. Movement in your peripheral vision that turns out to be nothing when you look directly. The sense that someone has just spoken your name, but when you turn around, everyone is asleep or occupied with their own tasks. Shadows that seem to move independently of their light sources, creating brief moments of confusion in the submarine's eternal twilight. These aren't signs of mental breakdown. They're normal responses to sensory deprivation, to the mind's need for stimulation in an environment that provides very little. But they're unsettling nonetheless, small reminders that human beings weren't designed for this kind of prolonged confinement in unchanging surroundings. You could swear you saw someone at the end of the passageway, just a glimpse of movement that made you think another crew member was approaching. But when you focus your attention, when you really look, there's nothing there except the familiar collection of pipes and valves and machinery that you've seen 1,000 times before. Sometimes you hear your name called not loudly, not urgently, just someone speaking in a normal conversational tone. You look around to respond, ready to acknowledge whoever needs your attention, but everyone visible is engaged in their own activities. No one has spoken, and the sound must have been some combination of mechanical noise and wishful thinking that your brain interpreted as human communication. The tricks your mind plays aren't frightening exactly. They're more like small mysteries, brief moments of confusion that pass quickly and leave you slightly puzzled, but not distressed. They're your brain's way of entertaining itself, of creating stimulation when none exists naturally. But there is salvation in routine, in the simple, repetitive tasks that keep both hands and mind occupied, even when nothing exciting is happening. Clean a pipe fitting. Polish a brass gauge until it gleams in the red lighting. Check the tension on a cable that was perfectly fine an hour ago and will be perfectly fine an hour from now. These tasks aren't glamorous, urgent, aren't particularly meaningful in any larger sense. But they provide structure, purpose, the satisfaction of completing something concrete in a world that often feels abstract and disconnected from normal reality. Wipe down a surface, inspect a connection, tighten a bolt that doesn't really need tightening. The motions become meditative, a kind of mechanical prayer that occupies the hands while allowing the mind to rest. There's comfort in the predictability, in knowing exactly what needs to be done and how to do it properly. These simple maintenance rituals keep you anchored to something solid and useful. They remind you that even in the most boring circumstances, there are still purposes to serve, still ways to contribute to the submarine's mission and the crew's survival. And slowly, as your hands find their rhythm in familiar work, as the routine tasks provide their quiet satisfaction, you discover that boredom itself can become almost peaceful, not exciting, not stimulating, but manageable in its own gentle way. When patrol requirements or enemy activity forces the boat to remain underwater for extended periods, 12 hours, 18 hours, sometimes even longer, the air inside begins to change. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with the gradual, insidious quality of something vital slowly being consumed. At first, it's subtle. You might notice that you feel slightly tired even though you haven't been working particularly hard. Perhaps there's a mild headache starting behind your eyes, the kind that comes from eye strain, but seems to have no obvious cause. Your ability to concentrate on simple tasks becomes just a bit more difficult, as if your thoughts are moving through something thicker than usual. The first real sign that something is wrong comes with the simplest of tests. Someone tries to light a cigarette or strike a match to check something in a dark corner, and the flame won't catch. Or if it does, it burns weakly, guttering and dying despite having adequate fuel. The match head glows orange for a moment, then fades to black without producing a proper flame. That's when you know the carbon dioxide levels are rising to dangerous levels. The air that seemed perfectly breathable just hours before has been cycled through 50 pairs of lungs so many times that it's becoming depleted of oxygen and enriched with the waste products of human respiration. The life support systems are working, but they're fighting a losing battle against basic chemistry and limited resources. And then, the mood changes begin. The same men who have been living in close harmony for weeks, who have learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of extreme confinement with patience and good humor, suddenly become difficult, not hostile exactly, but irritable in ways that seem to come from nowhere and attached to the most trivial of causes. Someone leaves a cup in the wrong place, and it becomes a major grievance. A crew member hums quietly while working, and it transforms into an unbearable annoyance that demands immediate correction. The simple act of another person breathing in the same small space becomes grounds for completely unreasonable resentment. Arguments break out over nothing, whose turn it is to use a particular tool, whether someone is taking up more than their fair share of space in the cramped quarters the proper way to perform routine maintenance that everyone has done hundreds of times before. Patience, that essential virtue of submarine life, becomes as fragile as spun glass, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. The remarkable thing is that the captain learns to read these mood changes like a barometer. An experienced submarine commander doesn't need to check instruments to know when the air quality is deteriorating. He simply observes his crew. When good-natured men become snappish, when patient sailors become argumentative, when the social fabric of the boat begins to fray over insignificant details, he knows it's time to surface, regardless of the tactical situation. The crew's behavior becomes a more reliable indicator of atmospheric conditions than any mechanical gauge. Instruments can malfunction. Readings can be misinterpreted, but human psychology responds to air quality with unfailing accuracy. When men who have learned to live together in impossible proximity suddenly can't tolerate each other's presence, the chemistry of their environment has shifted beyond acceptable limits. But surfacing isn't always possible. Sometimes, enemy activity in the area makes it too dangerous. Sometimes the tactical situation requires remaining hidden regardless of crew comfort. Sometimes the submarine must choose between the immediate risk of detection and the gradual risk of atmospheric deterioration. Those are the moments when every minute becomes a negotiation between safety and survival, when the captain must weigh the crew's growing irritability against the very real possibility of enemy attack. The boat continues its underwater course while the air grows thicker, the headaches more pronounced, the interpersonal tensions more fragile, and finally, the decision is made. Tactical considerations are set aside in favor of basic human physiology. The submarine begins its careful ascent toward the surface, toward the dangerous interface between water and air, where enemy aircraft patrol and surface ships hunt for exactly this kind of vulnerability. The boat rises slowly, cautiously, periscope depth first, to check for immediate threats, then higher until finally the order comes to open the main hatch. In those moments, between the decision to surface and the actual influx of fresh air, the crew experiences a unique kind of tension relief. That fresh air is coming, anxiety about the exposure to danger, anticipation of that first breath of clean atmosphere. And then it happens. The first stream of outside air pours into the submarine like liquid life. It's cold, shockingly cold, after the warm, stale atmosphere of the boat's interior. It carries the sharp salt taste of ocean spray and the clean, empty scent of open sky. It moves through the submarine's passages with the eager rush of something that belongs here, something that's been missing and has finally returned home. Everyone takes that first deep breath, not by conscious decision, but by involuntary response to the presence of real, fresh, life-giving air. 50 pairs of lungs expand simultaneously, drawing in oxygen that hasn't been processed and reprocessed through mechanical filters and human respiratory systems. The change is immediate and remarkable. Headaches begin to fade within minutes. The edge of irritability dissolves as if it had been a temporary madness brought on by nothing more serious than bad air. Men who were snapping at each other moments before return to their normal good humor, slightly embarrassed by their recent unreasonableness, but understanding its cause. In that moment, everything is all right again. The submarine has renewed itself, refreshed its most basic life support system, and provided its crew with the fundamental gift that makes all other survival possible: clean air to breathe freely, given by the vast ocean sky above. It's paper. Simple paper covered with handwriting, folded carefully and stored in oiled cloth pouches to protect it from the submarine's eternal dampness. Letters from home, the single thread connecting this underwater world to the life that continues on the surface, the only link between the men trapped in steel and the people they're fighting to protect and return to. These letters are read and reread until the paper becomes soft as fabric, until the creases where they've been folded threaten to tear from handling, until every word has been memorized, but still provides comfort in its familiar form. They're handled with the care usually reserved for religious artifacts, because in this environment they serve a similar purpose. They're tangible proof that something meaningful exists beyond this confined mechanical world. The contents of these letters would seem mundane to anyone living a normal life on land. They describe the most ordinary details of civilian existence: the progress of crops in the family garden, the weather patterns affecting the harvest news about neighbors who've moved away or moved in. Someone's dog has had puppies. The roof needs repair. Uncle Wilhelm visited last Sunday and stayed for dinner. But these ordinary details, these become the most extraordinary treasures imaginable. Each mundane update serves as proof that normal life continues somewhere above the waves. While you're sealed inside this steel tube, breathing recycled air, and eating moldy bread, and sleeping in shifts on borrowed mattresses, the world you remember is still there, still functioning, still following the gentle rhythms of peacetime existence. Your mother writes about preserving fruit from the apple tree in the back garden. She mentions that Mrs. Hoffman from next door asked about you and sends her regards. The cat caught a mouse and seemed very proud of himself. These details, which once seemed too trivial to mention, now carry the weight of entire worlds. They're windows into a reality that feels almost fictional from the perspective of submarine life. When a letter arrives, usually delivered during the brief moments when the submarine surfaces to rendezvous with supply vessels, you take it to whatever small private space you can find. Maybe it's the narrow gap between the torpedo racks, or a corner near the batteries where the red emergency lighting creates a small pool of relative privacy. You handle the envelope carefully, aware that this moment of opening it can't be repeated, that once read, the letter will never again contain the possibility of unknown news. You read slowly, not because the words are difficult, but because you want to make this connection last as long as possible. Each sentence is savored, considered, allowed to transport you briefly from this mechanical underwater world to the kitchen table where your mother wrote these words, thinking of you, missing you, maintaining the connection across impossible distance and circumstance. Sometimes there's news that would be sad under normal circumstances. An elderly neighbor has passed away. The family dog is getting old and moving slowly. The winter was harder than usual, and some of the fruit trees were damaged by frost. But even sad news from home carries a kind of comfort because it means you're still included in the normal concerns of normal life, still part of a community that continues to care about your absence. You find yourself trying to picture the scenes described in the letters. Your mother in the garden, checking on vegetables that you helped plant before leaving for military service. Your father reading the newspaper in his favorite chair, the same chair where he read to you when you were small. The familiar streets of your hometown, with changes so gradual that they're barely noticeable to people who live there every day, but which seem miraculous when described to someone who's been away for months. Other crew members respect the privacy of letter reading time. When they see someone hunched over a piece of paper in whatever small space they found, others quietly avoid that area, understanding that this is a sacred moment of connection that shouldn't be interrupted. These few minutes of reading represent the closest thing to solitude that submarine life allows. The letters get folded again, carefully, along the existing creases that have become as familiar as your own fingerprints. They're returned to their protective wrapping and stored in whatever safe space you've claimed for your most important possessions. But their words continue to echo in your mind, providing comfort during difficult watches and hope during the long hours when the submarine feels more like a tomb than a vessel. When you close your eyes during rest periods, it's often the images from these letters that fill your imagination. Not fantasies of glory or adventure, but simple domestic scenes sitting at the family dinner table, walking down familiar streets, performing the small routine tasks that make up normal civilian life. The letters have given you permission to remember that this other world exists, is waiting for you, is worth the hardships you're enduring. The words on those pages become a refuge. You read them, and for just a few moments, you're not on a submarine anymore. You're not surrounded by steel and machinery and the constant threat of detection and destruction. You're not breathing recycled air or eating preserved food or sleeping on a mattress still warm from someone else's body. Instead, you're home. You're sitting in your mother's kitchen, listening to news about neighbors and weather, and all the small, precious details that make up a life worth living. And in that moment, carried by words written in familiar handwriting on ordinary paper, home feels close enough to touch. The familiar outline of the naval base appears through the periscope, looking simultaneously exactly as you remembered, and completely foreign, as if you're seeing it through different eyes than the ones that watched it disappear below the horizon all those weeks ago. The submarine surfaces, for the final time engines switching from electric to diesel, preparing for the journey from the deep ocean to the shallow waters of port. When the boat finally docks, when the gangway is lowered, and you're given permission to step onto solid ground, something very strange happens. The earth beneath your feet seems to move, swaying gently from side to side, as if the dock itself were floating. Your body, which has spent so long adjusting to the constant motion of the submarine, no longer remembers how to interpret the stillness of land. You walk carefully, like someone learning to use their legs again after a long illness. The ground feels unstable, unreliable, even though you know intellectually that it's the most stable surface you've stood on in months. Your inner ear, trained to compensate for the submarine's motion, continues to make adjustments for movement that isn't there, creating a persistent sense of gentle swaying that will take days to fade. In the base facilities, you catch sight of yourself in a mirror, the first real mirror you've seen since leaving port. The face looking back at you belongs to a stranger. You're thinner, certainly. The restricted diet and confined living conditions have carved away any excess weight, leaving your face more angular, your eyes more prominent. Your skin has the pale indoor quality of someone who hasn't seen natural sunlight in months, a grayish pallor that speaks of artificial lighting and recycled air. But it's your eyes that are most changed. They carry a look that wasn't there before, something distant, watchful, as if part of your attention is always listening for sounds that don't exist in the surface world. It's the expression of someone who has learned to live with constant awareness of their environment, someone who has spent months in a place where a small mechanical failure could mean the difference between life and death. When you venture into the town near the base, when you walk among civilians living their normal, peaceful lives, you feel like an alien visiting from another planet. They talk about shortages and rationing and the minor inconveniences of wartime civilian life, and you listen without knowing how to respond. Their concerns seem simultaneously trivial and impossibly complex, like problems from a world you once knew, but can no longer quite remember how to navigate. Someone complains about the quality of the bread at the local bakery, and you remember your last meal aboard the submarine moldy Schwarzbrot that you ate gratefully because it provided necessary calories. Someone else mentions being annoyed by their neighbor's dog barking at night, and you think of the profound silence required during depth charge attacks when even breathing seemed too loud. You try to participate in normal conversation, but everything you want to say sounds either too dramatic or too technical for civilian ears. How do you explain what it feels like to hear your submarine's hull groaning under pressure? How do you describe the particular quality of fear that comes with listening to enemy sonar pings? How do you share the strange intimacy of living closer to 49 other men than most people live to their own families? You realize that part of you, perhaps the most important part, is still down there. Still listening to the electric motors whisper, still breathing that heavy oil-scented air, still moving through those narrow passages where every surface is familiar and every sound has meaning. The surface world feels hollow by comparison, too bright, too loud, too random in its sounds and rhythms. But then, something simple happens that changes everything. You step outside into natural sunlight for the first time in months. The warmth hits your face with an intensity you had forgotten was possible. It's not the artificial heat of the submarine's machinery or the close warmth of human bodies in confined spaces. It's the clean, generous warmth of the sun, freely given, requiring nothing in return. You take a breath of outdoor air, not recycled, not processed, not shared with 49 other people, but fresh air that has traveled over fields and forests, carrying the sense of growing things and open spaces. It fills your lungs completely cleanly, without the constant awareness of its finite supply that colored every breath aboard the submarine. And in that moment, you understand that you have accomplished something remarkable. Not the dramatic heroism of movies or propaganda posters, but something quieter and perhaps more significant. You have survived. You have endured conditions that would have seemed impossible before you experienced them. You have maintained your humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. This isn't a glorious victory, not the kind that gets celebrated with parades or medals. It's a quiet personal triumph that belongs entirely to you and the men who shared that underwater journey. You went into the depths of the ocean and the depths of human endurance, and you came back. Changed, certainly. Marked by the experience in ways that will never completely fade, but alive, intact, and carrying within you a knowledge of your own capabilities that most people never have the opportunity to discover. For a submarine sailor, that quiet knowledge of survival, that understated victory over impossible circumstances is all you could ever hope for. And standing there in the sunlight, breathing free air, feeling solid ground beneath your feet, you realize it's more than enough.